It's Wednesday here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter with Lorin Cox. We're going to talk to you about which teams need to be most concerned with their windows closing fast. Also, who can go first to worst and worst to first in their divisions, all here on the Locked On NFL podcast.
You are Locked On NFL, your daily NFL podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On NFL podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with my friend and co-host, Lorin Cox. We are here talking to you on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of the daily episodes that come out here across the Locked On NFL podcast, as we have hosts all throughout the week giving you different topics. And as always, this show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. Lorin, one thing that I think that everyone likes to feel is that, like, it's their year. Where no matter where you're coming from, no matter what happened to you last year, like this can be our year. But there are certain teams who I think everyone can kind of universally agree upon that this is that they are currently in the window of being a Super Bowl contender. But there are teams who have been in that window and haven't necessarily struck it yet. And I wanted to talk to you, and we're each going to do a little game here where we kind of rank our top three teams that we think need to strike the fastest now because their windows are closing fast. I think it's interesting to see this, and I feel like a lot of it also depends on the quarterback that you have on your team and where you are as far as the building, how you built the team around that quarterback currently.
Yeah, like I think for me, teams start to fall into a couple categories here of like, what does the quarterback's contract look like? Because teams' windows stay open the longest, and once you start investing a lot in that position, that starts to make things a lot more difficult. But then also like how old that quarterback is, and how many more years of high quality play they still have in front of them, and how long you can kind of keep riding that until. I mean, they can't all be Tom Brady and play till they're 45. Like things have to slow down eventually. And I think we start raising our expectations so high for these guys, but we forget that like a lot of quarterbacks by like 35 even, that used to be kind of the normal decline age from that point. Mm-hmm. We're pushing past that, but a few different guys I think are approaching that kind of window as well.
Absolutely. So let's start with this. If we're picking three teams that we think whose windows are closing fast and they need to act fast, because I think it's one, it's about the quarterback, but also two, about the roster and the nucleus. And when we say a window closed, it doesn't mean that they're never going to win again. It just means that with the core that they've developed, if they don't get it done now, they are at risk of having to redevelop that core, even if that quarterback's still around. Give me your third team here that you have on your list.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with a little bit of a hotter one here. That I think the Detroit Lions window is not open super long here.
Oh, okay.
They just went out and gave a big contract to Amon-Ra St. Brown.
They did.
Contract to, which one of their offensive tackles was that? Now I'm spacing on. They just gave out a big one to
Sewell.
Hey, Sewell. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
And then obviously Jared Goff got a massive contract as well. Like this is kind of what feels like pretty close to the peak of what this roster is going to be at this point, because the rest of the guys are going to start coming up on free agency, and they're not going to have enough salary cap space to keep paying everybody top dollar. Like you head into this upcoming offseason, and one of their top pass rushers, Marcus Davenport, will hit free agency. Their left tackle, Taylor Decker, will hit free agency. And they just traded for Carlton Davis to boost their secondary, but he's also in the last year of his deal. Then maybe they can afford to re-sign all three of those guys, but then you don't have anything left to add any other outside players. You're kind of stuck with the draft at that point. So like, to me, like this year is as best as the Lions are going to be, especially because offensive coordinator Ben Johnson is eventually going to get hired away, and you expect some kind of offensive drop off after that. Like this is their best shot, and the window will still be open after this year, but I think it only gets harder from this point. And eventually, Goff has some limitations, and if you don't have enough money to keep putting a great roster around him, we kind of saw what happened with the Rams. He can only go so far without having superior talent.
No, I feel you on that. And I think the Lions are an interesting pick there. I agree with it that they need to strike sooner because they signed Goff to a contract, and they have a nucleus right now. And like you said, it's not a guarantee that nucleus sticks together. So I think that's a good third team. I wanted to think out the box too a little bit with my first team. It's a team that people I haven't thought of as a Super Bowl contender for quite some time, but it's particularly because of what happened to them last year. That's the Jets. And I don't think that the Jets have been a Super Bowl contender, but I think that with Aaron Rodgers, they have sold their friend, like the idea, like they were building something to try to get to a point. They thought Zach Wilson was going to be it. They were building a defense. They got a new coach. They thought like this was going to be the nucleus. And then they sold themselves into this Aaron Rodgers situation. And if Aaron Rodgers does not get it done this year, or, you know, if he sticks around next year, we'll see what happens with that. And we'll probably see another dark retreat or whatever that is. I think the Jets, it's so crazy. Like they haven't had the chance to have their window open, but this is the only chance that they might have because of Aaron Rodgers' injury last year. And I feel like this is their one chance to get it right with him and actually be able to strike with him, because the time that they thought they'd have with him, maybe 2 to 3 years, is now 1 to 2 years. And they only saw one play from him last year. And I think that that's a team that, like, going into last year, everyone thought, oh, they're gonna be Super Bowl contenders with Aaron Rodgers, and then he didn't play. This year, I think everyone's skeptical. Will he even, if he lasts, you know, past the first game, how far will he go into this season? So I put the Jets here in my category. Who's another team you have here on the Windows closing list?
I was going to say the Jets were the team I was building up to number one, where it's like it's now or never for them. I mean, like, it's hard to imagine that even if Rodgers plays this full season, he'd come back next year in his year 41 or 40. He'll turn 42 like the following December. Like, to keep that up at a high level, like clearly they kind of went all in, getting a veteran left tackle like Tyron Smith, who's like 34, and they've got some key veterans on that defense as well. Like, they're in a good position to win if Aaron Rodgers can play like Aaron Rodgers, but that's such a major if right now that, you know, it's hard to, I'm not betting my money on it, but this is the time if they're going to do it. So we can count that as my second team here on here, as opposed to me revealing my last one, and you still got 2 more to go.
that works. So we're both on the same page about the Jets. I wonder if you're on the same page about another team in that division, and that's the Buffalo Bills.
Oh,
because who would you think I was going to say?
We'll get there.
Okay. That's very interesting. So the reason I'm saying the Bills is not because of Josh Allen. I think Josh Allen's phenomenal. He's doing a great job. But this team had to trade away Stephon Diggs. The defense has gotten a little bit weaker. I'm concerned. Like, I think that Josh Allen will, you know, even if things don't work out this year and they don't do anything great, I think that he'll still be with the Bills for quite some time, and maybe like in a few years' time they'll be able to rebuild another nucleus and be a serious contender about that. But I think that the crew that they put together to win with Josh Allen over the past couple of years never even got to the AFC Championship game. So now they're at the point where this has to strike soon, or the rebuild around Josh Allen is going to take some time. And then they're going to lose out on the division. I think that, you know, they have to look out for the Dolphins. We just talked about the Jets. If the Jets try to strike now, this is a point where I think the Bills, if they wanted to win with this iteration of Josh Allen, they need to do it soon. Otherwise, it's going to take them a 2 to 3 year period, I think, to redraft, re-solidify, and build up things around Josh Allen to get there. So I found it interesting. What are your thoughts on the Bills? Do you think that their window isn't even close to closing?
I think it might already be closed. I mean, for like the core that, like, to win the Super Bowl, like, obviously, like, it can reopen with Josh Allen, of course. Like, Josh Allen's going to have another 10 years in the NFL. But you talk about the, like, 2 to 3 year retooling period. Like, I think they're just about starting that right now. Like, they after you lose Stephon Diggs, but also,
so you're saying it's already over.
I mean, it just feels like they don't have much around him anymore on offense, and like that was what unlocked everything for them before. We've seen a lot of questions about how good Sean McDermott is as a head coach with everything they ran into last season before they lost talent. And it's not just Diggs, right? I mean, it's Tre'Davious White. I know he had kind of fallen off from what he was once, but like Jordan Poyer at safety, they lost a couple of their edge rushers and defensive line. Like, they're already bleeding talent on both sides of the ball because of how much money they've got invested in some of these guys. And I just don't think, like, I think they're going to be a decent team this season, but I don't have them like right back in the AFC Championship game threat nearly as much as I would have 12 months ago. And even then they were kind of a little bit shaky last season. So it's not that they'll never get back to Super Bowl contention, but I don't see them right now as like a top Super Bowl contender. I know the other team real quick I had on my list, I was going to throw the Miami Dolphins in there. Like, given where things are with an aging Tyreek Hill, who also wants a big contract, and there's some talk that they won't give him another contract.
That's a tough one.
They just signed an older Odell Beckham. Like, if they let Tyreek go because they can't afford that, they've got an old Terron Armstead at left tackle. They're about to give Tua a big contract that's going to make it a lot harder to keep everyone else around. Like, they've been going out and adding those kind of veteran mercenary players to win now between Calais Campbell and Odell Beckham, and they brought in Jordan Poyer from the Bills. Like, these are guys to win this year or maybe next year, but it's kind of like the Lions for me, where it's like they're going to have so much money invested. They got young quarterback, but how much can you keep supporting a guy who is good, but might not be that difference maker as the talent starts to maybe depreciate around them?
No, I effectively feel you on the Dolphins. I thought about putting them on my list. I've been kind of, I've been careful about saying what I say about Tua, because the Tua non people could come after us, Lorin. So you better be careful. They might be sicked upon us there. But I do feel you about the Dolphins, that they need to strike sooner rather than later because of Tua's contract situation. And if you want to keep Tua, or if you want to go get someone else. But I want to talk about another quarterback that might be leaving. That's Dak Prescott with the Cowboys. I think that they're another team. And granted, the Cowboys, everyone kind of acknowledges that, like, hey, they're going to be a tough team throughout the year, but they haven't been a team that's made a real playoff push in a very long time. I just think that with Dak Prescott's situation and with the investments they've made on defense, Diggs, Parsons, they've put together a team that can be very dangerous at times. But it's like, I think that there's a chance that Jerry Jones and that crew might have, I guess, maybe not overlooked, but might not have appreciated as much as this window as they should have, because now, with Dak Prescott's constant situation, they brought back old Ezekiel Elliott. I think that they're in a situation where it's like, I don't consider them real big threats. Like they're not in the top tier for me in NFL teams right now. But if they are going to be a team that can be one of those spark plugs that can even get to that point, I think they have to do that now. Otherwise, they're going to have to completely rebuild, especially the offensive side of the ball, really soon. And there's also talk about, how are they going to pay CeeDee Lamb? Will they pay CeeDee Lamb, and will he hit free agency? That would be a big conversation point too. Yeah,
the Cowboys are one of those teams I also had like on the fringe of my list here, because they were 12-5 last season. I mean, I know it's kind of a fool's 12, an inflated 12-5, but like still, like this is a team that made some noise, and they still got some real talent here, but it doesn't feel like they have a long-term plan in place here. It seems like they're still kind of winging it.
Absolutely. I want to talk about division takes. We picked apart the AFC East. We basically said 3 teams from the AFC East are about to have their windows closed on them. But I want to talk about in divisions, who's most likely to go from first place last year to worst place this year. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On NFL podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app that you need to download right to your phone right now to buy tickets to all your favorite events without it being stressful, because Game Time is where you can book tickets to your favorite sporting events and so much more. It's summertime, and that means it's baseball season, so get tickets to see your favorite ball club play their next game at Game Time. Whether you're in Pittsburgh and you want to see the rookie phenom Paul Skeens pitch on the mound for the Pirates, or you're in Los Angeles and want to watch Shohei Ohtani be a world sensation for the Dodgers, Game Time has got you wherever you go. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all your sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They even have killer deals on last-minute tickets where at a best price guarantee that can't be beat, where you can also save up to 60% off the price on tickets when you're buying last minute for sporting events. Plus, Game Time's best price guarantee means you'll always get the best price wherever you go. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website GameTime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, we're back here in the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter here with Lorin Cox. Lorin, let's go over teams that we think have the best chance to go from first place last year to last place in their division this year. And this is a tricky one. I think the worst to first is sometimes a little bit easier, because there's sometimes, things that get into that, and we'll get to that in the next segment. But first to worst, give me a team that was a division winner last year that you're very skeptical about their chances this year.
Yeah, this feels like particularly hard, even in both directions. I know we'll get in the other direction, but like as I was going through the standings from last year, it's like, man, a lot of the teams at the top of their division still looking pretty good, and there's not an obvious like, oh yeah, this team is going to be in massive free fall. But I mean, we were just talking about the Dallas Cowboys, and that's certainly a team here that feels vulnerable in a division that's also pretty good, right? I mean, it's hard to imagine them being worse than Washington, even with a rookie, with a rookie Jaden Daniels there. But like, you could see a scenario where Daniels has a pretty strong rookie season, and the Commanders get up close to 500 or whatever, and things really hit the fan a little bit in Dallas, where the lack of Dak Prescott contract kind of leaves things, not like just with distraction around the team, right? And things focus, and CeeDee Lamb is upset, and everyone is just not happy, and an aging Ezekiel Elliott, although he's not even 30 yet, but in running back years, he's certainly old. Like that the running games are working, so then the offense is kind of sputtering a bit, and that defense is slowly getting older as well. Between Eric Kendricks and DeMarcus Lawrence and some veterans on that back end, like it's hard to imagine them going from like 12-5 to 5-12, but I think that's a vulnerable spot where the Giants added some new weapons for Daniel Jones. They can get better. The Eagles obviously tried to retool a lot around Jalen Hurts, and then the Commanders, if they can get a little rookie magic going with Jaden Daniels, like quarterback has been a problem there for a little bit. So maybe that can start to spark some things with a new head coach and a new direction. And maybe Dallas can be one of those teams. I don't come like super confident, like, yes, take it to the bank. Cowboys can go worst to first, but there's a path there for them to fall down pretty far.
No, and listen, this is more of like a bold division takes as far as like, hey, like if something strong was to happen, here's where we see that could come from. Like we're not, neither of us are dooming the Cowboys to finish last. But if we're to look at teams that are most likely to be in it, and I agree, the Cowboys are in a position where, like you said, their window is closing. But when a team's window is closing, it's like you said, those distractions start to hover. Questions about McCarthy, questions about Prescott, questions about CeeDee Lamb, like all these people core to what they thought was when they put this group together years ago, they thought this was going to be a crew that could get them to where they wanted to be. They thought that this was going to be a franchise that was going to finally get its chance in the spotlight, and it hasn't happened. And so now I think that they're in a position where they're looking at Dak Prescott, they're looking at and there might be an uneasiness. And when that happens, that's when sometimes you see players either want to jump ship, lose focus, get frustrated, and then when losses happened, they compound upon each other, and then things get worked. Heck, we saw that with McCarthy in Green Bay when things started to go south there. So that's one reason I agree with you with the Cowboys. I'm going to give a really hot take here, and it's not that I think this team has the best chance to be really bad or anything, but it's just the situation they're in and the division that they're in. And I'm going to say the Baltimore Ravens, simply because this is the AFC North. And this division has been known to beat up on itself so much. All four teams had winning records last year. Baltimore was on top at 13-4. But you see the Browns, they're going to be competitive. The Steelers, they've been giving the Ravens a hard time for the past 4. They're 7-1 against the Ravens in the last 4 years. The Bengals are getting Joe Burrow back. I think that it's not that the Ravens are, I think that they'll finish with a losing record even. I even think there's a good chance that this division might even all finish with a winning record again this year. But I think that if I'm looking at divisions in competition, like we talked about the NFC East. The Commanders are coming from the basement there. They're coming from a really rough place. There's about a team. Chicago has a lot of work to do. Minnesota has a lot of work. Carolina has a lot of work to do. There's no team like that in the AFC North right now that's so far behind that it would take them forever just to be able to compete to maybe hover around 500. And that's where I think if Lamar Jackson suffers an injury, and I'm not, preying upon that or anything like that, but if Lamar Jackson was to suffer an injury and they had any setbacks that hurt them this season, I could see them falling behind a really tough division. What are your thoughts on the Ravens and the state of the AFC North?
Yeah, I think that's a sneaky smart pick, right? I mean, despite the team having the number 1 overall seed and being in the AFC Championship game, like it's not about the Ravens being so much worse. It's just about everyone else in that division being good. And they did lose a couple of key pieces on their offensive line, and they didn't go out and get some kind of like, other than I guess Derrick Henry is kind of the main like addition that you feel is exciting for them, but you still don't really have great consistency in the weapons for Lamar Jackson. And now some changes on the offensive line might not be that much worse, but still there's still going to be an adjustment period there. And you lose Mike McDonald on that defense. And there's a path for that to step back a little bit. And yeah, like they could even win 10 games and be tied for third with somebody else and by tiebreakers finish fourth and still not have a bad season, but be last in the AFC North. So I think that's not a team I had strongly considered in there. I was like, oh, the Ravens will be good. I don't even need to think about that one. But no, right. The rest of the division will be so good that it definitely is right there in that conversation. I was going to come back to a team that I talked about before, and I don't want to be labeled the Buffalo Bills hater here, but I think as we talked about with the Cowboys, where it's like, no, I don't think the Bills are going to be worse than the Patriots. Like if the Patriots and the Commanders are kind of the equivalent in those divisions. But I do think, like, we talked about how the Jets are in this window. If Aaron Rodgers is healthy, they're gonna be a contender. The Dolphins are obviously right there. Like, I think the Bills could easily go first to third. It's a matter of can the Patriots be good enough to pass them, and that's where I get stuck here. But I think the Bills, I I'm pretty confident in some kind of decline for them. I don't think the Patriots are good enough to jump up to third ahead of the Bills there. And that's where I get stuck here. But I mean, is there some way that, Drake May ends up playing really, really well? I mean, I still don't trust that they've got enough around him, and that I think they're still a year or two away from, really starting to make any noise there. So they're close, but I can see enough of a decline there where if something could go great for the Patriots and they can get to closer to 500, maybe there's a path there if things really go poorly for the Bills. But again, I'm trying to intentionally hedge a little bit here to not just crap on the Bills for 20 minutes.
No, I feel you, but the Bills were my other team here because so we're both. If Buffalo's coming for you, they're coming for me too, brother. But I think that it's no disrespect to the Bills, but I also look at teams and kind of like the Ravens too. I also look at teams where if the quarterback falls at some point, if he's out for 5 to 6 weeks, what is that team like? Like, I cover the Steelers. They haven't had a quarterback that could fall. Like if Kenny Pickett was hurt, it was kind of like, well, that's the same thing. And, they've kind of had that situation for the past few years. But I think there's teams like and they've had to win with their defense and other parts of their game. That's like how the Steelers have won all their games of the last 3 seasons. But there's teams like the Ravens who I think without Lamar Jackson, they're in a really tough spot if it's a long period of time. They can do spots without him. And I think the Bills are very similar with Josh Allen. You take Josh Allen off this team's Bills, and we just talked about it. Like they couldn't hit with their last score, and so now they have had to sell off a lot of those pieces. They lost a lot of the star players that they put around him. So now, if you take Josh Allen out of that equation, and again, I'm not saying that these guys are going to get hurt, but if I'm picking a team to go from first to worst, that's a factor that I have to consider there. And if the Bills lose Josh Allen for a long period of time, I don't think that they're at a place where they can battle it off. And like you said, if the Patriots, they got a new coach, they got a new quarterback, they could be unpredictable for a little bit. Even if the Patriots just hover at 500 and the Bills drop below that because of an injury situation, or they just have a rough year, that's where I think that fall can happen there. And again, it's not predicting that it happen. I think the Bills, will be a dangerous team again this year. But if something goes wrong, they're one of the teams that I'm looking at for going to the penthouse to the basement.
I'm a little surprised you didn't take the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because
I've thought about it.
Team where they squeezed everything they possibly could out of that. It felt like they overachieved last season and got more out of Baker Mayfield and everything than we thought they could. And that was only good for 9-8. They barely won that division. Right. And then you lose Baker Mayfield's offensive coordinator that seemed to kind of unlock something in him that we hadn't seen in years before. Plus, they lose Shaq Barrett, the Carlton Davis. They traded it away to the Lions. They lost Devin White at linebacker. Like they didn't necessarily make a bunch of big splash additions to take that big step forward. And in a bad division where they were barely the best of the worst, I can easily see them falling down. It just would require the Carolina Panthers to take a step forward and not be last. But they hired the offensive coordinator that unlocked Baker Mayfield. So if he could do something like that with Bryce Young, could they get to 7 wins and the Buccaneers finish with 6 or something? I mean, it's tough with the last place teams to try and get all the way down to worst, but I could easily see the big fall from the Buccaneers.
Absolutely. And the Buccaneers were the other last team I would look at here. It's tough for me to say other teams like the Texans with CJ Stroud in the AFC South, the state of that division. It's tough. You can't do that. They can't do it to Patrick Mahomes. I can't do that to the Niners right now. Whereas I agree with that the Lions are in the position. I think that the state of the rest of the division is kind of, I think that they'll at least finish second or third. If I'm picking a third team there, the Buccaneers would be that team. But the reason they're like my last team, I'm like, I don't know about, is because I just don't know if the Panthers are going to be good enough coming from 2-15. That is just a very high climb to get there. But to your point, the Buccaneers overachieved last year to get 9 wins. And I don't know, and I don't know if that's something that they can consistently do. I want to talk to you, though, about who can go from worst to first, because there's some teams we mentioned in here who could be in that category. We'll do that next here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, Lorin Cox, stick with us. We'll be right back. And we're back here on the Locked On NFL podcast. Chris Carter, Lorin Cox. Now, we did first to worst. Let's do worst to first. And, Lorin, I'm going to give you the first one, because I feel like there's a layup in here, and I don't know if you'll take the layup or you're going to take the 3-pointer here and try to get aggressive. But I'll give you the option to take either.
Yeah, like when I was looking across, there's one obvious team, and then there's a bunch of Well, maybe I could sell myself on that happening, but there's gonna need to be a few things that really goes their way. But the layup is obviously the Cincinnati Bengals. Like
Exactly.
Joe Burrow comes back healthy. You've still got T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, I guess, for now. But
For now.
for at least what seems to be at least this year. And I mean, we sort of have to assume that Joe Burrow will be fully healthy. I don't know that we've confirmed and fully seen him be Joe Burrow just yet, but like that's going by that assumption. Like that, anytime you got Joe Burrow on the field, like that team is always a threat, and it's a very good division, and they beat up on each other a ton. But like they were already 9-8 last season with all of the absence.
Jake Browning,
even when Burrow was around, like he played 10 games, and they still went 4-3 without him. But even in those 10 games, like he wasn't nearly fully Joe Burrow, and still went 5-5 with him in that spot. So like if he can get back to where he wants to be and where we've seen him before, like that team, it could easily get hot and go on a run and string together a first place finish there. And the Baltimore Ravens could easily take a step back for a lot of the reasons we declined. It becomes like, okay, where do the Browns and Steelers end up in this? Because I think all those teams are going to be within 1 or 2 wins of each other, and it might be a tiebreaker here or there, but I certainly see that path for the Bengals for sure.
That's the thing, is that's the layup right there. It's just coming back there. Now, I will say this too, because of the T. Higgins situation, and if you look at the Bengals defense, they were almost in my window closing category, because not because Joe Burrow's going to be gone or bad soon, but because the reason that they made the Super Bowl a few years ago is their defense was really good. They were able to limit Patrick Mahomes. They don't have that defense anymore. They weren't able to stop Mason Rudolph late last year, and because T. Higgins is going to go in, and I don't know if they can just get another T. Higgins in the draft coming up soon. I mean, you can. You find those get found every year, but you don't know if you drafted Puka Nacua or Chase Claypool. So I think that's the thing, is that they're not. I think that I left them off that category because I think that they'll do better and they'll be able to figure things out. But I do look at the Bengals as like, hey, they have the best chance of Joe Burrow, but they got to make it work, and they got to protect him. That's the biggest thing. He gets hurt because his offensive line has just been not good, and they've made some investments there. I'll be intrigued to see how that goes. I won't take a 3-pointer with my next team. I'll take a mid-range jumper. And the reason I call it a mid-range jumper is because this team has a quarterback that everyone likes and a new coach. And I'm going with the Los Angeles Chargers. It's not a wild take there. The only thing that I think gets in the way of this is that the Chiefs are the Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes is still with Andy Reid. They're still going to be top dog in the AFC West. But if I'm looking at a team that has a lot of talent on it, that for the past few years, I've been saying their biggest problem is that Brandon Staley is not a good coach. I'm looking right at them and I'm saying Jim Harbaugh gets basically what he got with the Niners when he came over there. Jim Harbaugh didn't manifest the Niners into that he inherited talent, and he certainly built around that talent. He certainly developed talent, but this is going to be a similar situation where there's talent on this roster that just hasn't been realized. And I think the Chargers are one of those teams. They went 5-12 last year. I don't think they'll be 5-12 this year. I'm not sure if they'll go 13-4 or anything like that, but I do think that they will be right in contention with the Chiefs for the AFC West, and that's why they're one of my picks to go from worst to first.
That was also a team on my list, and I wonder if we're gonna have the same list when it's all said and done. But, I mean, to your point, like, yeah, it's not that we think they're gonna be like so much better than the Chiefs or anything, but even last year the Chiefs were 11-6 in the regular season. Like, they had some struggles along the way. Obviously, great team won the goddamn Super Bowl, so like, not to doubt them. But, like, going from worst to first is about how you do in the regular season, and the Chiefs turn it on in the playoffs. Like, at one point last year, they were 8-5, and not that they were going to miss the playoffs per se, but they were not in first place. They were not number one seed, throughout that process. So like, they're vulnerable enough where like, okay, maybe the Chiefs win 10 games and the Chargers win 11, or the Chargers win 12 and the Chiefs win 11. And that's how the Chargers go from worst to first, but it's not that they've unseeded the Chiefs. It's just about having a slightly better regular season. And then we know Kansas City will turn it on in the postseason.
Right.
One more team from me. I'll have to throw a plug in for the Chicago Bears.
I knew he was going to, because that's my team too, though. Because I was sitting here thinking, I think he's going to say the Bears. He's the locked on Bears guy. How can he leave out the Bears? But I'm with you. But explain your reason. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say I don't think they're going. On my podcast, I'm certainly not out here saying this team is going to win first place in the honestly, they're probably going to finish third if I'm putting my money on it. But like, you got Caleb Williams, you got a really strong set of weapons for him. Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze at receiver, Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett at tight end, DeAndre Swift in the backfield. Like, that's as good of a supporting cast as a rookie quarterback has come into in a long time. Offensive line is maybe average, but like, it shouldn't be terrible, and that should be good enough. Plus, you bring back a defense that was hot last season at the end of the year. Really strong secondary, one of the best turnover generating teams in football, and also one of the best run defenses in football last season. I still have a lot of questions about their defensive line and the pass rush, but they're fully expected at this point to still add a pass rusher between now and week 1. Probably re-sign Yannick Ngakoue, but they're most likely going to add a little bit more to that. We haven't seen this defense at full strength just yet. And so they could get hot. If Caleb is really special right away, can have that CJ Stroud, Houston Texans type of season. Again, I'm not counting on it, but there's a path there for them to win 11 games. And maybe if Detroit just takes a little bit of a step back and Green Bay doesn't take a big step forward, like it's kind of like what we were just talking about with the AFC West, where they're all within like a game of each other, but maybe somehow the Bears have a tiebreaker or something and finish in first place.
No, I'm right with you. And the reason for this goes back to what you just said too about CJ Stroud. There was one team last year that went from worst to first from 2022 to 2023, and that was the Houston Texans. And why? Because CJ Stroud electrified. They had a new coach, they had a new quarterback, and they added other pieces. But the big thing was that they were able to get that increase in play, and I think that's where Caleb Williams can be that guy. And it also requires a division without teams that are, I think, in a generation of dominance. And I think that's where the NFC North isn't in right now, because the Lions, they did the thing last year, and they were really close to being in the Super Bowl. They had a lot of things clicking for them, but they're 12-5, and we don't know if this is a sustainable 12-5. We don't know if this is something that can be, bless you. We don't know if this is a thing that they can do again. We don't know if Jordan Love's going to be able to build off of the 9-8 season. And not saying that they can't, but these are big question marks here. We also don't know what the heck's going to go on with the Vikings, with JJ McCarthy and all that. But with that, I think that if the Bears get just enough from Caleb Williams, like you said, they can inch their way to the top. And that's why they're one of my picks too, because I look at that and I say, what's a division with a new quarterback, the team that's on the bottom. And also, again, the Bears won 7 games last year. Like they're not like the Panthers who won 2 games, or the Cardinals who won 4. They were a team that, like, hey, if a few things had gone their way with Justin Fields, maybe they're in the middle of the pack, and they don't have Caleb Williams right now. But I look at that and I say, hey, this is a situation where I think the Bears could find a way to sneak their way to the top. Similarly to how we're talking about with the Chargers here in the AFC West, like you said.
And for me, like, those are the only 3 teams I can really talk myself into going.
Yeah.
The Cardinals were fringe, like, I mean, maybe long shot. They got some
tough,
but like, and the same kind of conversation where it's like, not that the 49ers would be bad, but like somehow the Cardinals get hot and win 11 games. But like, even that's like everyone else is really in a tough division, and the bad teams at the bottom are really stuck at the bottom.
Right. Exactly. I think that's the situation that they're in. But Lorin, this is a fun show talking through these options here at you. Thanks for joining me here. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
As always, on the Locked On Bears podcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and you can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1.
Absolutely. He's Lorin Cox. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On NFL podcast every Wednesday. Find me on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday, as well as the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I wear a lot of hats, Lorin, but you can get them all there if you want to check out my stuff at Carter Critiques. Check out tomorrow on the Locked On NFL podcast as we continue getting you ready for training camp season to be back.